Um, Today we're going to be talking about verse 37 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. This verse consists of just two sentences. In the first sentence, Bhagavan says, sādhakatti-ē, sādhakatti-ē duvitam, sādhiyattil adduvitam, ōdugiṉḍṛa vādam-adum uṇmai. What that means is, even the contention that declares duality only in spiritual practice, non-duality in attainment, is not true. What that implies is that is, some people contend that duality exists only in spiritual practice, and after attainment, then only non-duality exists. But Bhagavan says even this contention is not true. The reason it is not true is because even when we are seeking to know our real nature, what actually exists is only ourself and not anything else. The basic import of Advaita is summarized in some Upanishad or somewhere as saying that Brahman is ekam eva advityam. That means one only without a second. That means that is why it's called non-duality. It's not even called monism. Monism can mean that all are one. But non-duality means there is no all, there is only one. Or there are no many, there's no duality, there is only one. So all is only one means in the sense that there is only one thing, that is all there is. In that sense, all is one. But whereas monism says that though there are many things, all those many things are in essence just one, or in substance just one. Advaita says there is no manyness. Since Advaita says there is no manyness, there's only one, no duality, only one thing, this doesn't seem to be in accordance with our experience, because in our experience, we're aware of many things. So Advaita has various ways of explaining these. The simplest way, that was taught by Bhagavan, is what is called drishti shrishti vada. That's the contention that there's no creation other than perception. Just like in a dream, we create a world in a dream just by perceiving it. Bhagavan says our present state is a dream, so we create all this multiplicity just by perceiving it. But even when we're dreaming, though we see many things, all there is actually there in the dream is ourself. We are seeing ourself as many in the dream, but actually what actually exists is only one. And since Bhagavan says our present state is just a dream, that means nothing other than ourself actually exists. We alone exist, but due to self-ignorance, we are seeing ourselves as many. But some people say, no, that duality is real. So until we actually experience non-duality, duality is real. And only when we attain self-knowledge, then only does non-duality come into existence or become real. Bhagavan says that even that contention is not true. In other words, Bhagavan is saying, even when duality seems to exist, what actually exists is only non-duality, only one thing, not many things. But all these many things that we perceive don't actually exist. They merely seem to exist. So there is, even while we are practicing self-investigation, self-surrender, in order to free ourselves from these many things don't actually exist. They merely seem to exist. In the Kalivemba version of this verse, Bhagavan added before this first sentence, he extended it by adding a relative clause at the beginning of it. The relative clause he added is Ariyade Muilam. which Uڵḷadu is an intensified form of Uڵḷadu, which is a negative adverbial participle that means not knowing. And muṇmaiyala is an adjectival or relative participle that means which one practices, undertakes, attempts, or makes effort in. So this clause, which qualifies the first word of the verse, which is sādhakattil-ē, which means only in spiritual practice, this relative clause means which one practices not knowing, and therefore it implies which one practices, undertakes or attempts only because of not knowing one's real nature. If we knew our real nature, we would know that there is one only without a second. There would be no need for any sadhana. Sadhana or spiritual practice becomes necessary only because we don't know our real nature and therefore see ourselves as many. So sadhana is necessary. That is the implication. Therefore, with this Kalivembra extension, this first sentence is Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu sādhakatti-ē duvitam, sādhiyattil adduvitam, ōdugiṉḍṛa vādam-adum uṇmaiiyala. That means the contention that declares duality only in practice, which one practices only not knowing, non-duality in attainment is not true. And that therefore implies even the contention that declares duality exists only in spiritual practice, which one practices or undertakes or attempts only because of not knowing one's real nature, and non-duality exists only in attainment, is not true. That contention is not true. To illustrate this, Bhagavan uses an analogy. The analogy he uses here is a story of the 10th man. This story is a traditional story. It is used to illustrate used for illustrative purposes. That is, there were 10 foolish men who were traveling, and at a certain point in their journey, they had to cross a river. And it was a rather dangerous river to cross, so they were concerned that they should all cross it safely. So after they had crossed the river, they wanted to make sure that all 10 of them had crossed safely. So each one of them counted the other 9 people, but forgot to count himself. So the first one counted and said, oh, there are only 9 of us. And then the second one did the same. And each one checked, and they could all, each one of them counted only 9 people because they all forgot to count themselves. So then they started lamenting. They didn't know who they'd lost, but they thought they'd lost one of their companions. So they all started weeping and wailing. And a passerby saw them, and he came and inquired, what is the matter? And they said, we were 10 people, but when we crossed after crossing the river, only 9 of us have come across. So we've lost one of our friends. So he asked, who have you lost? And they said, we don't know, but we've lost, because you must have lost someone because we're only 9 people. So he then counted and saw there were 10. So in order to bring their attention to themselves, he said, okay, I will do one thing. I've got a stick here. I'll give you each a tap with the stick. When I tap you with the stick, count. So he tapped the first one who said 1, tapped the second one who said 2, etc. And when he tapped the 10th person, he said 10. And then they started rejoicing. Oh, we have now, and they thanked the wayfarer for helping them to find the missing 10th man. But actually, the 10th man was never missing. Okay, the 10th man was always himself. But because they didn't count himself, they believed that the 10th man was missing. In exactly the same way, our real nature, we are not aware of ourselves as we really are because we don't attend to ourselves. We look at everything else, we don't look at ourselves. So this is used for illustrative purposes here. So in this second sentence, what Bhagavan says is, ādaravāy tān tēḍum kālun, taṉaiyaḍainta kālun, tān tāṇḍṛiyār. That means both when one is eagerly searching and when one has found oneself, who indeed is one other than the 10th man? We can expand that slightly just to make it clear that both when one is eagerly searching for the missing 10th man and when one has found oneself to be the missing 10th man, who indeed is one other than the 10th man? So the 10th man here is our own real nature. We are searching for our real nature, or we're searching for Brahman because we have failed, because we are overlooking ourselves. All we need to do to find out what we actually are is to attend to ourselves. When we attend to ourselves, we will see that we alone exist. We are ektameva advitam, one only without a second. Nothing else exists. Other things seem to exist only when we rise as ego, because the nature of ego is to be aware, the nature of ego is to be aware of many things and to be aware of itself as if it's one of those many things, namely a body. So those many things that we as ego are aware of don't actually exist apart from, they don't exist independent of ourselves. Just like everything we see in a dream, it doesn't actually exist independent of ourselves. It is just a mental fabrication. We project it in our awareness and are consequently aware of it. So the creation of multiplicity is nothing other than the perception of it. Perception and creation are not two separate things, because no phenomena exist except when we perceive them. Just like whatever we perceive in a dream doesn't exist except when we're perceiving it. It seems to exist only because we perceive it, but it doesn't actually exist. So it's all nothing other than ourselves. In Bhagavan, this is what Bhagavan teaches us in verse 26 of ōdugiṇḍṟa Nāṛpadu, which is one of the most important verses of ōdugiṇḍṟa Nāṛpadu, because in it Bhagavan summarizes the whole of his philosophy. What he says in verse 26 is, ahande undayin anetum undahum. That means if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. That means all this multiplicity, all phenomena come into existence only when ego comes into existence. Ahande indrail indru anetum. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ahande yabamam. Ego itself is everything. So why does Bhagavan say ego is everything? Because all the manyness, everything that we see is actually nothing other than ourselves. It is because the nature of ego is to be aware of many things. As soon as we rise as ego, we are aware of many things, but those many things have no existence independent of ourselves. They are in substance, they are nothing other than ego. So, it is often said in the Dvaita philosophy, but everything is Brahman. But Bhagavan has simplified it. He says everything is ego. If we investigate ego, there is no such thing. What ego actually is only Brahman. But it's just like if we mistake a rope to be a snake, the snake seems to exist. But if we look at it very carefully, we'll see there's no such thing as a snake, there's only a rope. Likewise, if we look at ego very carefully, we'll see there's no such thing as ego. What we mistook to be ego is only our own real nature, pure awareness. So, but as soon as we rise as ego, we are aware of things other than ourselves, because the very nature of ego is to project and perceive things other than itself. But whatever it perceives as other than itself is in substance nothing other than itself. Just like the substance of everything that we see in a dream is only our own awareness, our own outward-looking awareness. In other words, ego is the one substance which appears as all this multiplicity. So though ego sees many things that seem to be other than itself, nothing is actually other than ego. And ego sees those other things because of looking away from it. That is, we as ego see all this multiplicity because we're looking away from ourselves. If we look at ourselves, ego will dissolve and disappear because it doesn't actually exist. And what will remain is just pure awareness, which is what we actually are. But even when we are struggling to practice self-investigation and self-surrender in order to know our real nature, even at that time when we seem to be aware of all this multiplicity, actually what exists is only one. That is pure awareness. Pure awareness is our real nature. We, with pure awareness, seem to have risen as ego. In fact, pure awareness never rises as ego because pure awareness is always as it is. But we seem to have risen as ego, and consequently, we seem to be aware of many things. But even when we're aware of these many things, what actually exists is only pure awareness. How to verify this? Well, one says, look at yourself. The 10th man paid attention to himself, he would see the 10th man was never missing. Likewise, if we attend to ourselves keenly enough, we will see that we are always pure awareness, but pure awareness has never been missing. And because pure awareness has never been missing, the nature of pure awareness is to be aware only of itself, not of anything else. Awareness of other things is not pure awareness, that is only mind awareness or ego awareness. So pure awareness is not aware of anything other than itself. That is alone what actually exists. So when we see ourselves as pure awareness, you will see that we have always been pure awareness and that nothing else has ever existed. So even when we seem to be struggling to practice spiritual sadhana, and in order to free ourselves from this appearance of multiplicity, what actually exists is only one. That is ourself, pure awareness. So if any of you would like to ask any questions either about this verse or anything else.
Any questions?
If we understand that there's only one thing without a second, there's no room for any questions.
I have a question.
But though we read all these things, we at the surface level of our mind, we're convinced, but deep down, we still experience all this multiplicity. So it's difficult for us to be completely convinced. In order to convince ourselves completely of the truth of what Bhagavan says, we have to put it into practice. We have to see for ourselves that we alone exist.
Yes, Michael, my question has to do with the practice of self-attention. Sometimes I read or hear that it's paying attention to my own existence, or awareness of my own existence, or consciousness of my own existence, like I am. And then other times it's described as clinging tenaciously to myself.
Yes.
And when in my practice, for whatever reason, those don't seem to be exactly the same thing, unless I'm misinterpreting one or the other, or they are the same thing.
We can describe the practice in various ways, but actually the practice is only one.
Okay.
That is, it is an extremely subtle practice, because in any other practice, we're attending to something other than ourselves. So there are two things there. There's ourself, the subject, ego, the perceiver, who is attending something else, what is attended to. So there are two things there. But in self-attention, there are no two things. There's only one thing. That is, we are attending to ourselves. So language is, we have developed language, and we use language to express our experience of duality. So language can never adequately express the experience of non-duality. For example, if we talk about self-awareness, we all know what self-awareness is, but can you describe to me what it is to be self-aware? How does it feel to be self-aware? It cannot be put in words. So there are certain things which are beyond the range of words, or even beyond the range of mental conception. So self-attentiveness is such a thing, because actually self-attentiveness is our own real nature, in the sense that we are always aware of ourselves. Our real nature is pure self-awareness. So we seem to be aware of other things because we've allowed our attention to turn away from ourselves outwards, and thereby we've created all this appearance of multiplicity. What we are trying to do when we're investigating ourselves, we're trying to turn our attention back to ourselves. But when we turn our attention back to ourselves, now when our attention is facing outwards, there's ourself, there's our attention, which we're paying to other things. So there are three things there. There's we, the attention, and the other things. The knower, the knowing, and the known. But when we turn our attention back to ourselves, what we are knowing is ourself, and the very knowing is also ourself, because since we are awareness, the very nature of awareness is always to be aware of itself. So in self-awareness, there are not three, awareness of anything else, there are three things. There's the one who is aware, there's the state of being aware, and there's the thing of which we're aware. Whereas in self-attention, there's only one thing, because we who are attending, the attention, and what we are attending to are all only ourselves. So this is an incredibly simple practice. That's why Bhagavan said this is the easiest of all paths. But the reason it seems to all of us that it's difficult, but the only reason it's difficult is because of our desires and attachments. Because of our desires and attachments for things other than ourselves, we are not willing to let go of everything else. Because if we let go of everything else, we as ego will dissolve. And when ego dissolves, everything else dissolves along with it. Because everything else depends for its seeming existence upon our seeming existence as ego. So if we investigate ourselves keenly enough, we will cease to be ego, and hence everything else will cease to exist. So until we have managed to weaken all our desires and attachments for everything other than ourselves, we won't have sufficient love to attend to ourselves alone. We may come a little bit close to it, but we never go quite far enough. We're not ready to jump over the cliff, so we go up to the edge and we peep over the edge, but we're not yet ready to jump. We're still holding on to a tree or whatever, or railing or whatever is there. So that is what is happening when we're practicing self-investigation. Though our aim is to attend only to ourselves, we are never actually letting go of other things because of our desires and attachments. So there's still some tenuous awareness of other things, even while we're practicing. How to overcome that? Bhagavan said the only way is practice. Because the more we practice being self-attentive, the more we will be weaning our mind, we'll be weaning ego away from its desires and attachments for other things. So desires and attachments grow weaker, and the love to know ourselves grows stronger. But this is what is achieved by constant practice. That's why Bhagavan said practice is absolutely essential. There are some very superficial would-be gurus nowadays who say practice is not necessary. You are already that. You just need to see yourself. You need not practice anything. But people who say that, they're not practical, they're impractical people, because yes, all we need to do is to see ourselves. But why don't we see ourselves here and now? Nothing can be easier than seeing what we actually are here and now. Why we don't see ourselves as we actually are? Because we're not yet ready to let go of everything else. And the only way to gain the love to gain the willingness to let go of everything else is to practice this self-attentiveness. Because the more we attend to ourselves, the more our desires and attachments for other things drop off. Why this is can be explained in a very simple way. At every moment we have a choice. Either we attend to ourselves or we attend to other things. If we are constantly choosing to attend to other things, we are thereby strengthening our desires and attachments. But if every time we choose to attend to ourselves instead of to anything else, we are weakening our desire for attending to other things and strengthening our love to attend to ourselves. So without practice, Bhagavan used to say, without practice, nobody has succeeded on this path. There may be some people, indirectly he's referring to himself, but he didn't say so. There may be some people who seem to achieve in this lifetime without any effort or with just a minimal amount of effort. But those people have already done all the hard work in previous lives. So even the greatest sages, even Bhagavan, well, not Bhagavan, because Bhagavan, it's not Bhagavan who did the sadhana, it's the ego that took itself to be Venkataraman, but in previous lifetimes had done all the practice that was necessary. So in this life, when that fear of death rose, it was able to turn within and drown in its source. Then there was no more that ego. What then remained is Bhagavan. So it's not Bhagavan who did any spiritual sadhana, it's the ego that previously took itself to be Venkataraman.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks.
Bhagavan is actually nothing but our own real nature. Because when that ego that took itself to be Venkataraman merged in its source, what remained is only pure awareness, which is what we actually are. Yes.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Thank you. Can the worship of God with form alone bring about self-realization?
Indirectly, yes. Directly, no. That is, by worshipping God in form, that is another way of weakening our desires and attachments for other things. But God with form is something other than ourselves. That is not what God actually is. God is actually our own real nature. By cultivating devotion for God, even though we take God to be something other than ourselves, we are thereby freeing our mind from its desires and attachments for other things. That is, provided that our worship, our devotion is nishkamya. That is, many people who go to churches and mosques and temples or gurudwaras or wherever, synagogues or wherever, they go there and they pray to God. But why are they praying to God? A tiny, 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 tiny percentage, fraction of a percentage of people pray to God for love of God alone. Most people go to temple to pray to God to solve whatever little problems they have in their life, or to help their friends, or to take care of their uncle who's sick in hospital, or this or that. We pray for so many things. Or I should have more money, I should have a better job, I should have a better car. People pray for so many things. That is not devotion to God. That is, God is there a means to an end. If I pray to God because I want a Mercedes, who do I love? Do I love God or do I love the Mercedes? I love the Mercedes and I expect God to give it to me. So God is simply a means to an end. So that is not real bhakti. But bhakti, I think you're talking about, is when we're worshipping God for the love of God alone. If we do so, we are thereby freeing our mind from its desires and attachments for other things. So instead of asking God for anything else, we ask for God, give yourself to me. I don't want anything else. I only want you. But in order for God to give himself to us, we have to be willing to give ourselves to God. Because love is a two-way, love in this sense, between two things, is a two-way process. If you're married and you expect your wife to be doing everything for you and you don't do anything for her, that's not a loving relationship. Only when you both are giving to each other, giving your time, giving you attention, giving care, love, affection, all these things, then it's a loving relationship. So if we want God to give himself to us, we must be willing to give ourselves to God. Because only when we empty ourselves of ourselves do we make room for God to occupy our heart. So yes, definitely the path of dualistic devotion, if it is genuine devotion for God, it is a means to purification. But there's one shortcoming. God is not actually outside ourselves. He's not something other than ourselves. So long as we are conceiving God as something other than ourselves, we are creating a divide between ourselves and God. We haven't really surrendered ourselves, because so long as we feel that we are separate from God, we are still retaining our own self. So eventually on the path of devotion, we come to understand what actually exists is only God. Who am I other than God? If I say I am other than God, then God I'm limiting God. If God is the infinite whole, how can I be other than God? So who is this I who rises as if separate from God? We then turn our attention within, and then we see that God is our own real nature. So the path of dualistic devotion will purify the mind, and the purified mind will then come to understand that God is not something other than ourselves. God alone exists. We are nothing other than that. So it's only by knowing ourselves that we can know God. And by knowing ourselves, we thereby surrender ourselves to God. Because when we know what we actually, now we feel ourselves, I am Michael, I am this person. So long as we feel I am this person, we are separate from God. Because God is not Michael. But so I have to surrender this. Who is this I who says I am Michael? That I who is aware of itself as I am Michael, that is ego. That is what is separating us from God. So in order to give that ego to God, we need to know what we actually are. Because what we actually are is God. So the path of dualistic devotion seamlessly merges into the path of vichara. And the self-surrender cannot be complete without self-investigation. Because how can we give ourselves to God if we don't even know what we are? We need to know ourselves before we can give ourselves to God. So the devotion, the pinnacle of the path of devotion is self-surrender. The pinnacle of the path of surrender is self-investigation. So this path Bhagavan has taught us is the path of true love.
So surrender to the form of God that we worship will not directly bring about self-realization.
How can we surrender ourselves to something other than ourselves? So long as we are aware of a difference between ourselves and God, we are still retaining our individuality. Our sense of separation from God has to be surrendered. Then only have we truly given ourselves to God. So the dualistic devotion has to merge into this non-dualistic devotion. We have to come to the understanding, sooner or later, that God is not anything other than ourselves. God is what is shining in us as I. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 8 of Upadeshunya, he says, Anya Bhabam. He uses two terms, Anya Bhabam, that means in this context, meditation on what anya means what is other than oneself. So anya bhava means meditation on what is other than oneself. Ananya bhava, meditation on what is not other. What is not other than ourself only. So ananya bhava is another way of expressing, it's another term to refer to the practice of self-investigation. So he says, rather than anya bhava, ananya bhava, in which he is I, that is, in which we understand that God is nothing other than I, God is what is shining in us as I, that ananya bhava, that is anaitinyam uttamam. Bhagavan said that is the best of all. What he means by the best of all, or the very best of all. What he means by of all spiritual practices, all forms of devotion, this is the very best. That is attending only to ourselves. That is true love for God. Because when we attend to ourselves, we no longer rise as ego. So we are surrendering ourselves to God. But the God we are surrendering ourselves to is not something outside us. It is our own real nature. So
okay.
Naturally, as the mind gets purified by dualistic devotion, it will naturally come closer and closer to this path of self-investigation until eventually it merges.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
In Bhagavad Gita, verse 10:10, it addresses this point, isn't it, Michael?
What is that verse?
10:10, chapter 10, sloka 10. If you have a Gita nearby.
Google. Okay. To those whose mind is always united with me in loving devotion, I give the divine knowledge by which they can attain me. Yes, this is what Bhagavan implies in verse 3 of Upadeshundya. Kātanu kākum nishkarmiya karmam karte tirti aktundi para gati varikam bikamundi para. That is, by action done without desire for the love of God will purify the mind and thereby show the way to liberation. So if our mind is always engaged in loving devotion to God, as this verse in Gita says, He will give us the clarity. The divine knowledge here means the clarity of mind. The term in Sanskrit is buddhi yoga. That means the purity of mind, the clarity of mind, to enable us to see how to attain Him. How to attain Him is the term within. Is that, have I explained that correctly?
Yes, Michael. Yeah. So I think it is in one of the selections by Bhagavan.
All right. Yes.
So I really like it because it sort of clearly states that one who is devoted, it automatically leads to buddhi yoga.
Yeah.
With the real devotion, just like you explained.
Yeah. I think buddhi yoga here means that clarity of mind to understand what Bhagavan calls the chitta suddhi, or he says the rectification of the will. He refers to in Upadeshundya. Different terms, but all referring to the same thing. Do you know the number of the verse in Bhagavad Gita Saram?
Yeah. It's 19.
19. All right. Yeah. Yeah, Bhagavan uses the same term, Sadbuddhi Yoga. Yes. People think the Bhagavan's path is, or not many people, but some people think Bhagavan's path is the path of jnana. It's a very dry path, very lacking in emotion and everything. But without love, it is impossible to follow this path. Bhagavan often used to say, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. Without love, we can never know ourselves as we actually are.
But Michael, the love is a nebulous concept, though. It's hard to figure out what that is.
Okay, but I'll give you a simple definition of love. What I referred to earlier. Supposing you love someone very dearly, supposing you love your wife or your children or whoever it may be. What is the sign of real love? The extent to which you're willing to give yourself to the one you love. So if many people enter relationships with other people for what they can gain. So long as we are looking to gain something from a relationship, that is a very imperfect form of love. The more we are willing to give ourselves, the greater is our love. So if you want a simple definition of what is true love, it is giving oneself. In other words, self-surrender.
Is it service?
Service? Yes, service. If you're serving someone out of love for that person, yes, that can be. But that's a very outward form of love. But the real love is in our heart. We have to be willing to give ourselves to God. In other words, we have to be willing not to rise as ego, to surrender everything to Him, leave all our cares, concerns, give not only our cares and concerns, we who have all these cares and concerns, we must be willing to give ourselves to God. Service can be, we need a body in order to serve. And along with the body, we need mind and speech and all these things. But true surrender goes beyond body and mind. It's when we give ourselves completely so we don't rise at all, as I am this person. That is the greatest service. That's what Bhagavan said in verse 29 of Upadeshundya. Banda vidatra parasukumutra va inda nilay nitral undi para, irepani nitrala mundi para. Irepani nitral means abiding. Irepani means the service of God. Irepani nitral means abiding in the service of God. That is Irepani is a concept that is considered a very high goal in Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy. So Bhagavan in this verse defines what is real service to God. That is Banda Vidatra Parasukum Utrava Inda Nilay Nitra. Abiding in this state of supreme bliss, but is devoid of bondage and liberation, that is true service of God. What he's referring to there, the state in which we don't rise as ego, in other words, the state in which we just remain as we really are, which is supreme devotion, which is supreme happiness, parasukham, and which is beyond, which is devoid of both bondage and liberation. Bondage and liberation are just a duality. So long as we're in bondage, liberation seems to be necessary. But when we know ourselves, but we were never in bondage, then bondage and liberation become meaningless terms. So abiding in that state where we don't rise as ego, that is abiding in the service of God. So if we really want to serve God, we need to surrender ourselves. We need to cease rising as ego. And the way to do that is to turn our attention back within, towards ourself alone.
So you make it very clear. So just abiding and sitting in your own state is true love, is true devotion.
Sadhguru used to explain this verse 29 of Upateshundya. He said, when we rise as ego, we are unnecessarily giving work to God. Because once we rise as ego, it then becomes God's responsibility to save us. So God has to appear as guru. He has to come and give us teachings. He has to slowly turn us attention back within. So in other words, we are giving God. We're like a naughty child who goes out to play on the street when all the cars are passing by. The mother has to run after to catch the child and bring it back in. So by rising as ego, we are like being like that naughty child. So our mother and father, Bhagavan, has to come running after us. If we stay at home peacefully, minding our own business, then God has no work to do. Stay at home means abide as we really are.
There's no extra work for mother.
Yeah.
So that's how.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do to serve God. If we avoid giving trouble to God, that is the greatest service.
Any other questions? Everybody's calm. So, you have one question? Sean's got a question.
Namaste, Michael.
Namaste.
I have a simple question, Michael.
Yes.
What do you do about the desire for food, for example? The desire for food is very basic.
Okay, yeah. No, that's a perfectly reasonable question. So long as we rise as ego, we are aware of ourselves as a body. And as a body, we have so many needs, not only for food. We need air to breathe. We need water to drink. We need food. If we live in cold climate, we need clothing to keep ourselves warm. If we live in hot climate, we need shade to keep ourselves cool. So as a body, we have so many needs. Those needs, we cannot, we will always feel that we have needs so long as we feel ourselves to be, we're aware of ourselves as a body. So ultimately, the only solution to all these needs, don't rise as ego and thereby experience yourself as a person. But we now lack sufficient love to surrender ourselves completely. So we are rising as ego and we now have all these worries. We live in a complicated world now. We can't just go out into the jungle and forage for our food. The only place we can go foraging is in the supermarket, and the supermarket doesn't allow us to forage there unless we've got sufficient money. And to get sufficient money, we have to work, and so on. So we've made our lives extremely complicated. But we don't have to worry about all this complication because Bhagavan has revealed one secret. He said, what is destined to happen is going to happen. What is not destined to happen is not going to happen. However much you try to avoid what is destined to happen, it's going to happen anyway. However much you strive for something that is not destined to happen, it will not happen. Therefore, the best, he said, lēduvitañ, this is certain. Therefore, the best course is just to be quiet. What he means by being quiet is not rising as ego. The food and clothing and shelter and all the other needs of the body will be met by your destiny. Or if it's your destiny to starve, however much you try, you're not going to avoid starving. You will starve. You may have $1 billion in the bank, But circumstances will put you in a situation where no food is available. So if you're destined to starve, you're going to starve. So let us not worry about all these things. Leave all concern about these things to God. God is taking care of everything. What we are destined to have, he will give us. What we are not destined to have, he will not give us. So we need not waste our thought on these things. If our body and mind seems in modern day society, unless we work and earn money and everything, we can't get the food and clothing and shelter and everything. If your body and mind are destined to, if you're destined to get the food, your body and mind will be made to do whatever actions are necessary in order to get that food. So if you're destined to have some job, to work in IT, or to be an office manager, or to be a street sweeper, or to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or whatever it is, your body and mind will be made to do whatever actions they're destined to do. So that need not concern you. You have only one responsibility. No one says, you're a passenger traveling on a train. You know that the train is carrying all the burden. So you need not carry your luggage on your head. You can put your luggage on the luggage rack. You can sit back and happily travel to your destination without any care or concern. What that means is everything that is needed for our bodily life is already being taken care of by God. So if we understand that he is taking care of everything, we don't have to give a thought to any of these things. One says, when we know God is bearing all the burden, is doing all that needs to be done, why should we trouble ourselves thinking it's necessary to do this, it's necessary to do that? The actions that our body and mind have to do, according to destiny, they will be made to do. Our only job is to surrender ourselves, to give no thought to any of these things. This is what he says in the 13th paragraph of Nana, but he begins that paragraph with a very, very important sentence. Anma chintane tabira, vera chintale kalamurtu satram idam kadamo. Without giving even the slightest room to arising of any thought other than thought of oneself here, Atma Chintane means self-attentiveness, without giving room to arising of any other thought other than self-attentiveness, and thereby being Atmanishta Paranai Irpte, being one who is firmly established in oneself, tāṉaiyaḍainta, that is giving oneself to God. So true self-surrender, when we attend to ourselves so keenly, but we give no room to the rising of any other thought. But in order to attend to ourselves so keenly, we must have that willingness to surrender ourselves. We must have that willingness to let go of all other thoughts, not to care about anything else. Why thoughts arise? Why we think, oh, how am I going to get my next meal? Am I going to have am I going to be able to pay all my bills this month? I think so many thoughts about so many things unnecessarily, because these are already determined by destiny, by prarabdha. So leave the whole burden to him. Your only duty is to surrender. That means not rise as ego. We're all hopelessly failing in this, but this should be our aim. This is what we have to make as our aim. We have to be ready to put in the patient practice, patient and persistent practice.
But Michael,
Yes?
Thank
to my knowledge, I have never wanted to arise as an ego. But the fact is, I am an ego now.
You have risen as ego and you are standing now as ego only because you want to. Is there anyone else who made you rise as ego? We have to take responsibility. The mess we are in is a mess we have created. what this today's verse said. Bhagavan says, even to say that there's duality during practice and non-duality after attainment is not true. That means non-duality is always the truth. That means you alone exist. So if you have risen as ego, it's your responsibility. You can't blame anyone else. Religions give us nice excuses. They say, oh, God has created the world. Then we can get very angry with God. Oh, God, why you create such a terrible world? Why you allow all these things to happen? But Bhagavan doesn't put any blame on God. He puts the blame on us. He puts the responsibility where the responsibility lies. We have risen as ego. Nobody is forced to. We've risen as ego because we want to rise as ego. So we must be willing to surrender ourselves. We must be willing to cease rising as ego. It's entirely by our own will that we have risen.
Michael, why does the modern world trying to increase their ego rather than decrease it?
Because the modern world, like any other world, is a product of ego. Ego created this world for its own sustenance. Without a world, there would be no ego. That is, ego, the very nature of ego is to dream. That is, to project a world and to get itself involved in the world. Because in that way, it perpetuates its self-delusion. Until we are willing to surrender ourselves completely, we will continue projecting a world. And there is no such thing as a perfect world. The world is Maya. It will always be deluding us. But what is the root of Maya? What is the source of Maya? That is ego. The world is a product of Maya. Ego is Maya.
So Michael,
this world for its own sustenance. So it will continue creating the world is always complicated. There are always so many problems in the world. This keeps us entertained. We complain about the global warming and about the politicians, about Trump and about all these Modi and Boris Johnson and all these politicians who are making a mess of the world. This Australian fellow, Scott, whatever he's called, who's, because of his policies, the whole of Australia is burning. We've got lots to complain about. Yesterday, Britain foolishly left the European Union. We can complain about that, or we can celebrate it if we like the idea. But the world will always keep the ego entertained because the ego produced the world for its own entertainment. We are entertained by our own suffering, our own lamenting about the terrible condition of the world. So long as we look at it, the world is a bad place. What is the solution? Don't look at the world, look at yourself, and then you'll see there never was any world.
Michael, how can you say responsibility, will, and destiny at the same time?
We are responsible for our destiny. What we are destined to experience in this lifetime is the fruit of of actions that we've done in the past by our own will.
How can that be when there is no will?
There is a will. Don't you have likes and dislikes?
Not of my own doing.
How do you, but who is responsible for your likes and dislikes?
It's destiny. It's all product. It's all.
No. You're putting the cart before the horse. Destiny is a result of your likes and dislikes. It's not the cause of your likes and dislikes.
That's not fair, Michael.
Michael, I want to add something. I want to add something there myself. See, sometimes I do feel that I'm helplessly trapped in the undertakings of the mind, and it's as if it has already been established. And by the time I realize that I have been trapped and acted on it, the act already happened. So this might sound like stream of consciousness for me, but what I'm trying to say is there is a hold that the mind has on us And sometimes to decipher that and not be attached to that is where the practice lies. I guess we go, but once I realize that I'm trapped in the mind, I go back to the source. But I have to say that I seem to be like a puppet in the hands of someone, and sometimes I feel I don't have control over that.
Yes, yes. This is how it seems, but we say, but the mind has got hold of us, or we are under the sway of the mind. But actually, who is holding on to whom? It is we who are holding on to the mind, not the mind holding on to us. It may seem to us that we are being swayed by our vasanas, but those vasanas are our own likes and dislikes. We are responsible for them. So because it's like we are like a person who is holding on to a tree and saying, this tree is not letting go of me. Who is holding on? It is not the tree that's holding us. We are holding the tree. Because of our desires and attachments, we are not ready to let go. So we feel that we are trapped, but we are trapped only by ourselves. Nothing is responsible for our present condition other than ourselves. It's important to recognize our responsibility, because only when we acknowledge that we are responsible for the mess we are in, will we acknowledge responsibility for getting out of this mess. How obviously the ultimate cause of our bondage is our seeming existence as ego. But what makes ego strong and seem impenetrable is its desires and attachments. That is, as ego, we built up so many likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, hopes, fears. These are like an army. But ego is like the general, and he's surrounded by a very powerful army of likes, dislikes, and so on. So long as the army is surrounding him, the general is invincible. So we've got to slowly weaken the army. That is what we are doing when we're following this path of self-investigation and self-surrender. Or more slowly by some other, one of our friends was asking earlier about dualistic devotion. More slowly by dualistic devotion, we slowly purify the mind, and then we eventually come to the path of self-investigation and self-surrender. This is the rapid route, the rapid and ultimate route to purify the mind. So purifying the mind means freeing ourselves of our likes and dislikes. Often we feel we're trapped by our likes and dislikes because we have conflicting likes and this. That is, our will is in conflict with itself. We want to be desireless, but we also still want to maintain all our desires. I know that happiness lies in desirelessness, but still I want this. So there's a conflict going on there. Every true spiritual, the whole of spiritual practice is nothing but a fight between our better vasanas and our worst vasanas. Bhagavan has said the story in the Puranas, they tell stories about the Deva Asura Yuddha. That's the war constantly being fought between Devas and Asuras. Bhagavan said that is nothing. That is just a description of what is going on in the mind of every spiritual aspirant, between our liking to surrender ourselves and all our other desires and attachments. Our liking to surrender ourselves, to turn within, be self-attentive, that is the Devas. All our other desires and attachments are the Asuras. But we are responsible for both. We have to make the choice. Do we want to, if we side with the Devas, they will certainly win because we are the source of all power. How our desires have power, they only have the power that we give them. If supposing you have a strong desire or a strong fear, the more you dwell on the object of your desire or fear, the stronger that desire or fear will become. how to wean your mind off a desire or fear by diverting it towards something else. So you can divert it towards the thought of God, pray to God, God, I've got so many desires, I've got so many fears, phobias, I've got so many problems, I can't deal with all these things, you help me solve these things. By diverting our mind away from all these things towards God, slowly, slowly these things will drop off. And then God will slowly give us the clarity of mind to understand, but the way to be free of all desires and attachments is surrender. And in order to surrender ourselves, we need to turn within. So the spiritual path is a process. We are all undergoing that process. How far along the process we are, we don't know. But we know the direction in which we have to move. We have to move away from our desires and attachments back towards ourselves.
Thank you.
Slowly loosens up.
Yep.
தொன்றுவிற்று வருகின்ற விசேவாசனைகள் அளவற்றனவாய் தோன்றினும் அவை யாவும் சுரூபதியானம் கிளம்ப கிளம்ப அழிந்துவிடும்.
Yes. Yes.
Pawan beautifully concludes.
Yes.
Gets that in ṉaṇḍṛiyār.
Just for the benefit of those who don't know Tamil, I'll just read the meaning of that.
Yeah, please.
That's in the 10th paragraph. What he says is, even though Vishaya vasanas, that's all our desires and inclinations, or desires, attachments, everything, which come from time immemorial, rise in countless numbers like ocean waves, they will all be destroyed when Swarupa Dhyana means self-attentiveness, when Swarupa Dhyana increases and increases. So we just, that persistent, patient and persistent practice is the only way. It's absolutely necessary.
So rather than keep asking, why desire, why thoughts, why vasanas, I think we just focus more and more on self-attention.
Yes. Whose desires and attachments are these? Whose vasanas are they? Who is troubled by all these vasanas? I am, but who am I?
Right. Just don't want to be involved in unnecessary discussion of what.
Yes.
Garbage.
We can go on analyzing things other than ourselves ad infinitum. There's no end to the analysis of things. Bhagavan says in I think it's verse 3 of Anmavidya, he says, Kannai aridal indri, pinnai edu arihil en. What is the use of knowing everything else without knowing ourselves? Kannai arindidil, pin enne uḻḷadu ariya. What exists? If we know ourselves, what exists? What exists to know? So if we know ourselves, there'll be nothing else for us to know. Nothing else will exist. Until then, there's no use in knowing other things. Because all those other things are just our own mental creation. Only thing we need to know is ourselves. A certain amount of analysis is necessary on the lines of neki, but neki analysis is necessary to understand what we are not. That's all the analysis that is necessary. Beyond that, we've got only one thing we need to know. Who am I?
Still happens.
Okay, I guess.
Yeah, please continue.
I don't mean to perpetuate the garbage.
No problem.
And so I am still waiting in it. So I'm trying to understand it. Not understand. I don't care. Okay, it's garbage. I get it. But Michael, just like in my experience, like for instance, when we're talking about destiny, prarabdha, free will, all of that, that's fine. Like I'm just at a very practical level for me. So this morning I was late to your session. So this body mind was late in arriving. And so does that so I really didn't have a desire. My vasanas were not to be here, but then somehow I just showed up. Like why? Like I'm just wondering what is at play.
It was your destiny to arrive late.
So then I am responsible.
You may feel that it was because you were preoccupied with other things. But even if you hadn't been preoccupied with other things, something would have delayed you because you weren't destined to be here. But yes.
So then the responsibility lies where?
All responsibility lies with you. But
you meaning this entity, this body mind.
Not even the body mind. You. The one who says this body mind is I.
So God.
No. God doesn't take this body to be I. It's ego that takes the body to be I. All responsibility ultimately leads back to ego. Ultimately, ego is responsible for everything. Because as Bhagavan says, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Ego itself is everything. So the ultimate responsibility for everything lies with ego. So we are ego. We have to make the choice now. Do we want to perpetuate this, or do we want to bring this to an end? If we want to perpetuate it, continue looking outside. The dream will go on for, well, one dream after another will go on indefinitely. Until we turn within. The only way to bring the dream to an end is to turn back within. So one day you're late, one day you're early. These are trivial matters. These are just part of destiny. It doesn't matter. Only one thing matters. Are you attending to yourself or not?
I'm not doing that either.
That is the situation we're all in. Most of the time we are not attending to ourselves.
So Michael, if you're not able to perform well in the world or attend to yourself, where does that leave you?
How well you perform in the world is already determined. You cannot perform any better in the world or any worse in the world than has already been determined. Bhagavan has given us only one responsibility. That is to attend to ourselves and thereby surrender ourselves. We are finding every excuse possible to shirk this responsibility.
Yes.
Because we are not yet willing to surrender ourselves. So, but who is responsible for that lack of willingness? We are.
Once again?
Yeah. So we have to take responsibility for everything, because ultimately what exists is only ourselves. There is nothing else. Now we seem to be ego. As ego, we are responsible for all this multiplicity. If as ego we are willing to turn within, see what we actually are, and thereby surrender ourselves, then we will see there never was anything other than ourselves.
So I am not responsible for anything else other than attend to myself as this ego. So whatever happens, whether I show up or I wake up, I brush my teeth, whatever, that can all go to the wayside.
It's all predetermined. You cannot change that. You can want to change it. You can try to change it. You can make a resolution. I make a resolution from next time I'm going to be on time every time. But it's not going to happen unless it's destined to happen. If it happens,
that's true, Michael.
People start their new year with resolutions. Come the middle of January, most people have dropped over resolutions because they find they can't live up to. So none of us live up to our expectations. So no point in having resolution. If we want to have a resolution, let us resolve to attend to ourselves. Even that resolution will fail, but at least if it succeeds little by little by little by little, it will eventually succeed. It will eventually conquer everything else.
So there's no self-blame, no self-criticism, no or saying like it's laziness or lack of motivation, lack of drive, lack of vision, blah, blah, blah.
Don't blame yourself for the little things. Blame yourself for the very appearance of this universe and your appearance as a person in that universe. That is where your blame lies.
Oh my, all right. Okay, I'll start doing that then.
If you blame yourself for the little things, then your preoccupation is on those little things. If you blame yourself for the appearance of the whole universe and for your appearance as a person in that universe, then that takes you back to yourself.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Yes, yes, yes.
Humberto.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, sir.
All thanks to Bhagavan.
Sorry. Okay, last question.
Michael, I'm very confused.
We all are.
Yeah, I'd like to explain the reason why, and please correct me and kind of get me straight on this, because it's really I'm kind of distressed about this.
Yeah.
So far, we have said that everything is basically destiny. Whatever is destined to happen, it'll happen no matter what we do, and whatever is not destined to happen, it would not happen no matter what we do.
Yes.
Now, I also understood, and perhaps I misunderstood what you said, that our destiny is our responsibility. Our destiny is the product of our actions, which are our responsibility. So we are in the end responsible for our future.
Yes.
So to me, this is a strong contradiction, and I cannot figure out. Perhaps you have explained it recently in the latest words you said, but I'm hung up on this that I haven't been able to process it.
That is why I say we have to take our responsibility back to the root. Destiny is like an arrow. Once you've released the arrow from the bow, you are responsible for having shot the arrow, but you've got no control over the arrow once it's been shot. That's why the cause for everything, the cause for the appearance of all this multiplicity is our rising as ego. We are responsible for that rising as ego. In that sense, we are responsible for everything. I don't hold you individually responsible for Donald Trump or Adolf Hitler or Stalin or Genghis Khan or any of these people. You're not responsible. Indirectly, all this, whatever you're seeing now, is a projection of your own vasanas. But it doesn't mean that you're evil to have projected all these evil people. It's not like that. The fault lies with your rising as ego. So Bhagavan is always taking us back to the root of the problem. Sometimes people came to Bhagavan and said, "Oh, Bhagavan, I've done such terrible things." Bhagavan said, "What is done is done. You can't undo what you've done. Don't think about it." Because by dwelling on all the bad things we've done in the past, in Who Am I, he says, instead of lamenting, "Oh, I'm a sinner, how can I be saved?" If one is tenaciously clings fast to self-attentiveness, one will certainly be saved. So Bhagavan is concerned only about the root of all problems. Bhagavan is a doctor. He's the greatest doctor in the world. A good doctor will not treat the symptoms. A good doctor is concerned only with the root cause of the disease. He will treat the root cause and the symptoms will take care of themselves. So Bhagavan has identified what is the root cause of all problems, is that rising as ego. And he's given what is the medicine? Attend to yourself. So that is all we need to be concerned about.
I understood now, Michael. I appreciate your words.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But what you say about confusion, confusion is the very nature of ego, because ego is what Bhagavan calls chit jada granti. It is neither awareness, chit, nor is it this body, which is jada, non-aware. But it's some spurious entity that rises between the two, mixing the two together as if they're one. So ego is born in confusion. I mean, the very nature of ego is to be confused. The purpose of self-investigation is to cut through all this confusion by seeing what we actually are. If we see what we actually are, all confusion ends. Until then, we're all confused to a greater or lesser extent.
Thank you, Michael.
Saying I am confused is just saying I am ego.
Okay.
Because
All right.
the very nature of ego is confusion.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel much better. Thank you.
And thank you for the questions.
Confusion can be removed only by clarity. That is by the clarity of self-awareness, by being aware of ourselves as we actually are, clearly aware of ourselves as we actually are. Bring it to an end ego and all its confusion.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. Namaste.
Thank you.
All thanks to Bhagavan.
That's right.
Is it? I'm just repeating like a parrot what I learned from Bhagavan.
We will see you next month, Michael.
Yes, next month I think it's going to be on the 7th or something.
Right.
Michael, when will we see you in the US?
Exactly.
I don't know. Ask Bhagavan. I don't know my destiny. Time will tell. If it is to happen, it will happen when it is to happen.
That is great.
Amen.
If not, I'll come to you, Michael.
If that's your destiny.
If that's my destiny.
Yes, exactly. Whatever will be, will be.
Okay, Sarah.
Exactly.